Hey everybody, it's Marty the JavaScript Party, and Rhett decided to join me this morning. Nothing exciting going on in the living room, so she decided she would like to participate with us. So it is Monday morning, March 17th. So we have 14 days left in March, exactly 2 weeks, and then March will be over. It is 7:29 a.m. and it is looks like it's gonna be a beautiful day. The sun is just starting to come up here in Marietta, Georgia. Um, so I think we're in for a beautiful day. I have to work, and then I have school tonight. I have paralegal school from 7 to 10 p.m. Um, so I'll probably be pretty tired tomorrow. I have this little light here that I do that right now is like sitting at green and purple and blue, sort of emulate kind of early morning. So it's kind of got me trying to kind of control my something rhythm. Uh, but basically, probably around 8 o'clock tonight. No, probably like at 7 when school starts. I'll turn it to all red, and so what that should do is should sort of tell my body, hey, you're just pulling in all this red light. So we are definitely in the evening. So hopefully it'll be pretty easy. I won't get really spun up during class, and then I can just go down and go straight to sleep and be up bright and early tomorrow morning. But anyway, so basically what I'm trying to do now is, well, what we have is we have this application, and it kind of renders all these little um, 3JS objects, these cubes, and it sort of animates them in various ways. And the way these get laid out is that there is a some very simple JavaScript that or template Angular template rendering language that just says, hey, whatever the index of this item is, multiply that by 130, and that's its left position. So we've already run out of room, right? Like we couldn't add another one, or if we did add another one, it would be off. So we really need this to be a little bit more intelligent. It needs to be able to sort of do an analysis of like how wide this whole thing is, and then how many of these can fit in, and when we're on the next row. So instead of just the left, it also updates the top and stuff like that. So we're kind of going down that path. Um, so I do have some code that is running on a regular basis, about 60 times a second, that that is checking to see what's going on. But there's nothing for it to. It doesn't have any brains. It doesn't know what to do yet. Um, and so for kind of a weird technical reasons, so that is living in animations because I do want it to be animated. So it lives in this animation service, and it's all the way at the bottom here. It's called visualizations layout, and this runs 60 times, attempts to run 60 times per section, second, and avoid doing any kind of calculations because calculations are very expensive. Uh, the people who write the JavaScript rendering engines, or I don't know if those are the right words, but JavaScript have really gotten it to where it can check memory very, very quickly, but doing calculations takes longer. So we don't want to do any actual calculations. Everything we want to do is just we want to use memory um, for that. Um, so with that in mind, what I wanted to do, so it does get a visualization IDs, and it would be nice if I could just use my um, um, rendering service to get that information, but there's some sort of weird uh, error that shows up anytime I try to inject the renderings, the ST render service, which is the one that would have all this information. So what I'm going to do, and I don't really understand what that is, and I'm really excited that as long as I keep sort of circling back and look at this one day, it, I'm sure it's obvious. Whatever the problem is there, it's so obvious, and at some point one day I'll be like, oh, and and then I will have leveled up and become that much better of a Angular JavaScript developer person. But what I have in general, as the pattern that I've sort of created is I have this services folder, um, and then inside of it I have this animations utilities, and then I have ST and 3. And ST and 3 are sort of together, they're doppelgangers. ST is showtime or space and time, um, and that's sort of how I want to describe what we see up here. And so if you look in there, you'll see that there's a camera, a geometry, a material, mesh, render, and scene. And then they all have their ThreeJS doppelgangers. And but then animation has no ThreeJS sort of parallel. There is no concept of animation inside of ThreeJS, and then utilities. And so what I want to do is add another one, and it will be layout. And it's going to be my layout service that knows how to do all this kind of thing. So once I start hitting more than 4 folders, I immediately start thinking, okay, I need to further divide these things. And so I don't know if these two need to go into a folder since they are sort of doppelgangers with each other, or if these two, animations, utilities, and my other one need to go in the folder since they are outside. But 5 is the point where I start to really think hard about how to divide things. 7 is the point where I think that you really, absolutely, 100%. If I had 7 folders in here, 100% need to break it down into further folders. And if I believe if you get past 10, you're probably past the point of no return, where you're sort of stuck with your situation, because you start having way too many weird relationships once you have all those sort of at the same peer level. I believe there's some sort of biblical thing in there in the Bible about like when you get to a certain number of employees or people under you, then you have to divide them up. And I believe that number was 7, but I'm not 100% sure. But anyways, yeah, I think it just gets weird once you get to the bigger numbers. That's sort of a bad smell. See, we have 4 there. We only have 1 inside of components. And then like when you only have 1, then you start thinking the other way. Like, do I have this broken down? And the lead of Angular, I've heard him in a couple of live streams, and he would definitely say that this is not a good idea, having a components folder. He doesn't like that at all. He thinks that that's generally a bad pattern. He thinks that everything should be broken down more in their what they do. So I think what he would say is like animations should be its own folder, and then if there's any components for animations, they should be an animation. And since there's interfaces for animations, that would go on there. Like, so if there was a component for camera, then all that, it should be broken more down by feature, not by type, I guess would be the right word. So services wouldn't be services. So I have an animation services, so animations type would be in the same folder with animation services. Like, I think that's how he believes it should be. I definitely am taking that very seriously and thinking through it, but I'd already sort of started down this path. Fortunately, refactoring that kind of thing is pretty easy in Angular, but I'm just going to sort of write it out and see where I end up. But anyway, so what I want to do is have inside of this services folder have a new one called layout, and that's where my layout services are going to be. Anything that's layout specific. I think there'll probably be another service in there called Mason or Masonry or something like that will handle sort of figuring out where these things go. And I do think that is going to get complicated. as we scale up. But for now, it should be pretty straightforward. It should be like, okay, how wide is this? How wide are these? These are always a specific width, and basically figure out the rows and columns. But I do think that at some point these are going to be different sizes and widths, and it's going to have to figure out, it's going to try to figure out how to lay things out so that they look appealing. And then I'm also going to have the ability at some point to move, like double click on this one, and be able to move it around, and then these would all just act like this one didn't exist. So there's going to be a lot more logic that comes in. So anyways, what I like to do is go into my packages folder, or packages.json, and I like to sort of have the command that I ran sort of documented in here. And some of them I've messed up, but I left them messed up just for memory sake, but because there was like some spelling issues and all that. But anyways, what I'll do is I'll come in here and I'll find, and the main reason I like to do this is because it ensures that all of this is run against these things. If you put it in this script and you run it as a script, it will make sure that you're not using like a globally installed CLI or something to do that. Because I used to have a lot of problems with that early on. That may not be an issue anymore, but I am not. I mean, it's just sort of a habit that I've developed. It might be sort of a vestigial habit, but it is worth keeping. So basically, this is going to be layout service, and I don't want it in components. I want it to be in services, and I don't want it to be in viz. I want it to be in layout, and that's as far down as it goes, I believe. Now let's just go double check that makes sense. Close this. Let's close that. And yeah, so I want it to be a sibling to these guys. That's what I want to see when I'm done running this script, is a new service that comes in here. So I'm going to come over here. When I do that, to execute that, I type in npm and run, and then the name of it, layout service. Now, I will say that, like, I used to do this and then I couldn't explain why. And now I've been making videos for a little over a year now, maybe closer to 2 years. And I've probably explained that 100 times. And now I've gotten good at explaining it. And that is the whole point that's probably the most important point. That's not the only point. That's the most important point to making videos. When you make videos, it forces you to articulate what you know. And once you can articulate what you know, like, there are things that you could know and not have any way of articulating that. It's weird. It's weird. If you haven't sort of gone through that thought process before, there are things that you know that you can't explain to other people. Like, you know how to do it, but you can't explain. One of the things is, like, most people, at least in the United States, I don't know how footwear works in the whole world, but in the United States, most people, we wear these tennis shoes or shoes that have laces, and then those laces, we tie them in a very specific way, and almost everybody ties them the exact same way. And there's, like, let's say there's 350 million people in the United States. Of those 350 million people, I bet you only like 10 million people can actually articulate, can actually say in words how to tie your shoes. But when you write code, you can get to the point where you're doing all kinds of, like, really, really advanced things, and you have no way of articulating that, of saying that in words. I know that I constantly will go to a developer and I'll be like, what does this line of code do? And they'll say, like, they may spout off like an entire essay, 2-page essay of what that line of code does. And it's like, so for me, every line of code should translate to one line of English sentence. Um, and I find that code is a lot easier to read for other people if every line translates to one line of English. If you have a bunch of ternaries and stuff in there, and it's just like you can't even explain it in one line of whatever language you speak, you can't articulate it. When you can't articulate it, uh, you can't explain it, and you can't teach it, and it'd be difficult for anyone to learn it. But anyways, so what I want to see is that I execute this line of this script in my packages folder, and I see a new folder show up in my services. And the reason is, so this is ng telling it to use my version, this package's version of the Angular CLI. G is for generate, S is for service. Put it in the services folder, and then put it in a folder called layout, which doesn't exist yet. So now I'm going to run it. I'm going to watch this, and I'm going to hope to see my new folder show up in here. And there's a good chance it won't. I can't tell you how often I get something wrong. So that's weird. So when you create a component, what happens is it'll create a folder for that component because there's three things. But when you create a service, it doesn't make a folder for that. So it did not work the way I wanted it to. So I'm going to delete that. That was a recent update to the IDEs. Instead of actually deleting stuff, it moves them to the recycle bin, I think. I think that was one of the things, and I liked it back in the day when it actually just deleted it. But anyways, I could see why they did that, and there have been a few times where I was like, crap, I wish I hadn't deleted that, and I wish I had a way of getting it back. So anyway, so I want it to be in a layout folder. And mostly because, I wouldn't even want it to be in a layout folder if it wasn't for the fact that it's going to create a unit test spec. And so I don't want, like right now, if these weren't in their own folders and they were all like just one thing, we would have like 10 files in there. And I do think that there'll probably be more services in here. So layout, and then this is the layout service. So hit save, and what we want to see is a layout folder with a layout service inside. Hit the up button, run it again. And now it's done. We have a layout folder. Inside of it, we have our layout service. So there's a couple things that have to be done. One is the layout service needs code in there, and I want it to be a lot like, let's go to render, a lot like, maybe material will probably be the best example. A lot like this, where it has like a dictionary, it can get a sequence, so every layout item has its own little ID, unique ID, a material service, or it won't need that. But then it has like a get by ID and a create. So it can create one, put it in the ID that could be updated. I can get it, and then I guess maybe, and then it probably need like a set by ID where I tell it what to change things are, and then so that will sort of maintain the state of all these pieces of all these, and I can say what the left and top are of each one, and then in the actual animation service, right here, it can look and it can actually move it, and so I'm making this shit up as I go, right? Like, just to be clear with you, I do not know exactly how to do this. I've never done this before, so I am just so I might be talking with authority, but I'm so insecure about all of it. Like deep down inside, I don't know exactly what I'm going to do, I'm trying to figure out what I'm doing. I'm being very careful because this is sort of one of the foundational pieces of this application. And if I mess it up, then a year, like New Year's this next year, I might be like fully restarting all over again because of this. And I don't want to have to restart this project. So I'm thinking very carefully. But it's going to have a list of these, and I'll know which one to um, where, I'll know where it'll know where to put this based on what's in here. So you know when yeah, so we'll probably need another function that calculates. See, the thing is I don't want the calculating, going through and calculating where this to go. I do not want that inside of the animation service. I don't want that to happen here. I don't want any calculations to happen here. I just want it to look and be able to look in there and see where this goes. So inside of the layout service, there's going to need to be another function that actually puts the values into the items, and that that will have to be done, on some sort of like, maybe even, I hope it doesn't have to be on a loop. I don't think it'll need to be on a loop, but it may need to be on a loop. But I don't want that loop to be tied to the rendering. So like if you change this width, I'm going to want this to recalculate, but I don't want it to recalculate inside of the animation service, because this is happening 60 times per second period, and it's going to slow down all animations all animations, and a lot of, like, this right here, this is animated, so it's actually going to affect how that worked, right? But like, I don't want it to affect how that works. So if I put it like something, let's say, that runs every 10 times a second, let's say, if I have some sort of loop that runs 10 times every second and it's looking for changes so that it modifies these things, then that'll happen when it happens. It won't affect any of the layout or drawing. And then this piece here will just read to see what's happening. And then, people will see the, like, there might be some sort of lagginess between when that comes down, because it's only updating 10 times a second instead of 60 times a second. But I don't think that's a big deal. But if 10 times a second isn't fast enough, then 30 times a second might be fast enough, or maybe 100 times a second. Maybe it needs to be calculating things faster. But what I don't want to do is be tied to the request animation frame. The request animation frame needs to be with as few calculations as possible in it. And I've never written or seen the code or understand the request animation frame code, but I have written a bunch of calculations inside of request animation frame and seen the pages get very, very janky, is what they call it, where you see things sort of weirdly happening and things just don't happen smoothly. And then at the same time, I've needed things to update very, very quickly. Like I needed the update to be fast, so I put like a loop that was running 100 times a second, and did the calculations in there, and then and moved them out of the request animation frame, and everything got nice and smooth again. So you don't want to bog down your request animation frame with calculations. You just want it to be reading memory only. And I do not fully understand why. I mean, there's a little bit of, I guess, superstition. Just like, hey, every time in the past I've gone down this path, it's been bad. Every time in the past I've gone down that path, it's been good. I don't quite understand why, but that's just been my personal experience. So anyway, so now we've got the layout service, and we are 24 minutes in. I don't have to work for like another hour and 6 minutes, so I got plenty of time, but I feel like this is a really good stopping spot. I think those were some pretty advanced concepts. And you might want to take, if you didn't understand what I was talking about, you might want to take a bit of time and just go into like ChatGPT or whatever and just explore the concept of the request animation frame and what it is. I will say that the language of request animation frame is really bonkers, especially for me, as a sort of from a worker background, right? Like my parents were workers, everybody's workers. A request is something very different. The word request means something very different from my background than whoever came up with the name request animation frame. Um, and and then a request for some people is like a form you fill out for something to happen every month. So you have to put in our purchase request. Okay, like let's say you had a pizza place and you're the manager, you might have an ongoing request to um, every week on Monday something shows up at their boxes. We get boxes every Monday, and we always get 1,000 of them. We have a standing order of 1,000 boxes. Some people would call that a request. Um, for me, a request is a one-off thing. I'm asking you to do this, but um, So, anyways, yeah, the request animation frame is when you study about it and you read about it. There is some linguistic challenges that make it kind of difficult to understand for some people, and I was one of those some people. Um, so you got to be patient. You really got to stay calm while you read it and not let your brain just sort of flip off and decide I don't want to try to understand this. But basically, um, you don't want to do calculations in your request animation frame. It's what it comes down to. And even if your computer handles it pretty well, if you do a lot of calculations on there, and then you try to like let's say you try to run your code in the cloud, and you you know um, like you're using like a virtual machine that's running in the cloud, and it just has a tiny little CPU processor. You're going to bog that thing down, because you're running. It's a lot of CPU. It's sort of, it could be extremely expensive if you're paying by CPU, but if the thing is running in like a desktop computer at somebody, like on a web page on a desktop computer, then and they have, like, let's say they have your typical four processors that are you know a gigahertz each or something. um, it might run great, but then you might have you know anyways, there's a lot to think about. It's a whole subject into itself. Everybody, it is Monday. um, we survived last week. Last week was brutal with daylight savings time. Everything seems, albeit for me anyways, a lot better. So have a great day, everyone, and happy coding. Bye.